Welcome to FitBody Lifestyle, the show where we dive deep into the world of fitness, health, business, relationships, and the art of living a balanced life. I'm Jamie.
And I'm Greg, and we're here to give you the benefit of our experiences in the fitness and bodybuilding industry, the corporate world, running a business, personal development, and building healthy relationships.
Whether you're sweating it out in the gym, hustling in your business, or seeking balance in your everyday life, you're in the right place.
So lace up those sneakers, grab that water bottle, and let's get ready to transform our minds, our bodies, and our lives.
Well, welcome to today's episode of FitBody Lifestyle. I am so excited about our topic for today because we're talking about the scale and is it a friend or foe? Is it our frenemy? I think that how we're tracking our progress in our fitness lifestyle is really important. And so many of us become a bit obsessed with that number on the scale. I know I have in the past. So having this opportunity to really talk it through so people can take to heart some of the things that we'll suggest and address, I think is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'll give you maybe a military perspective on this is that a weapon in the military is a tool. It's designed to do something, but it does not work independently of the user. It does not work independently of the rest of the people on the team. So when we talk about the scale in particular, and the reason why it's a frenemy is because so many people get fixated on that one piece of data or on that one piece of information instead of looking at the bigger picture of the context of what's going on and how am I holding myself accountable, but also not beating myself up. So maybe, how about we start this, Jamie, today? Is let's talk about, first of all, why? Why do you measure yourself? Why weigh yourself at all?
Now, that's a great question. And it is a piece of information. It's data. And that's why I feel like when we're talking about our progress in the fitness world, it needs to be tied to a multitude of things, and weight can be one of those data points along the way. In some cases, there's the desire for weight to increase. It could be because you're in a season where you're looking to put on more muscles, so you're looking for that change to happen. In some cases, and I think in most cases, people are wanting to get a bit leaner, lose some body fat. So we're measuring to see, did the weight go down, to ultimately keep an eye on whether or not we feel like the body fat's changing. The problem, of course, is that there are other factors that are going to be affecting the weight, not just those two factors. How much muscle have I put on or how much body fat have I lost? So that's why it's a tool, but it's not the be all end all.
So maybe that first point is that understand why you're weighing yourself and then add in the context of where am I at on my fitness journey? What is my objective for this month? Am I improving, meaning I'm trying to add muscle or wanting to add muscle, or am I leaning out? What is the context of that scale weight in today? And then there's that next piece that also then ties into context, which is how do I look? At the end of the day, I mean, that's part of it. And then body measurements are another factor that we look at in terms of FitBody Fusion. We look at measurements along with that weight, and it's not uncommon to see people add weight, but their measurements will improve. The waist will get tighter, the glutes will get bigger, which is generally what most bikini athletes want to have happen. But there is context to that. So maybe talk a little bit about how do you individually, not as the coach is one thing because we're seeing that information, but how do you as a competitor deal with that context? How do you contextualize that number that shows up on the scale?
I think that's a really good question. And I first wanted to talk a little bit about how often should we be taking this data point? And I think that rolls really well into what you're asking me. For some of the athletes I work with, I don't want them to weigh themselves as much just because I feel like mentally they get a little bit too tied to that number. And then if it's not a number that they feel good about, then it could affect their mood for the day, their workouts for the day, things like that. I feel like as you become a bit more well-versed in what's going on with your body and you can then be a little bit more objective about it, then that number can really provide a lot of great information. So even weighing daily, if the right attitude is in place about it, can be helpful. And one of the things I did for years is I did weigh myself daily and looked at it from a scientific standpoint. What did I eat yesterday? Where are my hormones? Where am I in my cycle right now? Was there extra sodium or less sodium than I normally take in? How much sleep did I get last night? I actually had one client that provided me in her check-in this week, because she's been doing this process that I'm talking about, every single day's weight along with how much sleep she got the night prior. And they track exactly one for one. The less sleep she got, the more she weighed in the morning, and vice versa. So it can be a really helpful tool. Where it becomes the enemy part of it is when, again, it slips in and it starts to become a little bit too much of a mood killer, or, somebody's tied too much to that number as success or failure, when in reality that could have nothing to do with it. There's just too many factors involved.
And I do think we see that fairly frequently, which is athletes will say, I dreaded weighing myself today. Oh, I really was afraid of what I was going to see on the scale today. We see that frequently. And at the end of it, I think part of what, not at the end because we're not at the end, but as we talk about this, part of it is establishing that mindset going into this, is that the scale, and this maybe gets into the larger discussion of growth mindset, but it is, what is the purpose of the scale? Why am I weighing myself today? In the situation that you described, if I'm weighing myself to assess the connection between my sleep and my body weight, well, that has tremendous value for me. But if I'm fixated on the number on the scale and not on the context of why I'm doing that or what I'm looking for, then it can be very debilitating. And in some ways it can, and we see this a lot, is the scale will throw people into a depression.
Absolutely. I actually have had a client go so far as having to have her husband look and log her weight in so that she couldn't see it, because it just became such an issue for her. So I would love for people to walk away from this episode with a sense of, you're not bad or good. This is not a reflection of who you are or the progress that you've made. It's simply a data point, and then being able to understand a little bit more about the big picture and those things that could be affecting the scale. That way that you're making a more helpful assessment, and you're able to use that data in a more productive way. So that's really the purpose behind why I wanted to have this conversation today.
We've talked about designing a social experiment where we would take a number of athletes who would weigh themselves on a device that would not produce a number. It would just send a signal somewhere that would record, and then they would never have that. And when we talked about this, the interesting thing that we always came up with was nobody will go for that, because they just can't. They just are going to want to know what that number is. And I'm not saying we couldn't do the experiment. I'm just saying that always is a big factor. And for competitors, they get very fixated on that focus. But as we talk about this, I think part of it, when you went through the experiences and stuff that you described, part of it implies that the athlete is doing what they're supposed to do. So they're hitting their macros or their calorie goals for that day or that week. They're doing their fitness training, whether it's cardio, resistance training, or the both. They're doing everything that they're quote unquote supposed to do. Let's talk about it when they don't. Let's talk about it when somebody has that sugar craving and they go out and they go to Baskin Robbins and sample all 31 flavors. They go somewhere and they just binge. They go to a cupcake place and get a bunch of cupcakes, or they just eat. They binge. And I know binging is an emotionally charged word for us as well, but talk about that approach and how then you contextualize and process the mindset aspect of the scale in those circumstances. Did I give you a weird question? Okay. How do you deal with somebody? What's the mindset approach to a person who does not stick to their program, who does go out and binge eat and overeats, and then they have something show up on the scale and they're dreading the scale, but it does in fact show up on the scale. So before you were talking about it in the sense that somebody comes out and they're basically doing everything that they want or they're supposed to do, but the scale doesn't necessarily cooperate that. And so to look at the larger context. The context I'm asking you is, how do you process that now with somebody who overeats?
So if
Did I ask you a bad question?
So yeah, I'm really not jiving with this question, but if I have somebody that is not sticking to their plan, that's not sticking to their we use a macros based plan versus a meal plan, and we're going to talk a little bit about the whys in another episode. But if somebody's not sticking to their plan in terms of their nutrition, and maybe they go off, maybe they have a really bad, like Thanksgiving level stuffed themselves sort of scenario, and then we start talking about the scale, that's most likely going to be reflected. I still encourage people to stay on their regular pattern, whatever that is, of weighing themselves. So if they're one of those people that is looking at from a scientific standpoint, then they can look and see. And occasionally you'll have somebody that goes completely off and actually has a drop in weight, or the weight levels out. And in that case, maybe the cravings were, the body telling them that they needed a little bit more. But in most cases, when we're not sticking to our plan, we're going to see the weight go the opposite direction of what we're looking for it to go. And in that case, it's time to course correct. I mean, it's okay that that's a little bit of a wake up call, and okay, let's get back on track. Let's get more consistent. One of the things I tell my clients is put the frying pans away, stop beating yourself up. You can't go backwards. You can't undo it. If you're going to go off track, be present, enjoy it, then move forward from it and get back on track. At that point, when you do your check-in or your weigh-in, it's going to show up most likely, unless the body just needed that refeed, and, you acknowledge it and move forward. So I think more often than not, when I see people getting upset, it's because they did follow their plan and the scale's not reflecting their expectations. That's more frequently where I feel like people get upset about it. I think people accept it a little bit more when they know that they didn't follow their plan, and there's going to be an expectation.
Well, and I think that's kind of where I was going with the question, and I probably didn't phrase it very artfully, but the mindset of how do you coach somebody, and how do you personally process the fact that if you did deviate from your plan and you did overindulge, how do you, and maybe I'm going to just pause on that question for a second. So, because you used the phrase that we talk about a lot, which is put down the frying pans. And I'd like you to just tell the story of where that phrase, that notion came up.
So my yoga instructor actually was the one that used to tell me to put away the frying pans when I can tend to be very hard on myself. And I feel like this is why I can relate very well to clients when they're giving themselves a hard time. So I do understand that. And it just doesn't serve us to continue to beat ourselves up for something that, the growth mindset is all about falling down and picking yourself back up. And take a moment to acknowledge what happened and think about, what could I have done different? Let's take some lessons out of it. Because if I learned from it, then it was a good thing. As long as I'm able to then acknowledge, forgive, and move forward, that's really what I learned through that. And certainly my amazing yoga instructor that taught me that lesson has stayed in my head for many, many years after.
And the notion of putting down the frying pans is just to keep you from beating yourself up when things don't go the way that you want them to go. And there can be a lot of reasons. We see people that fall off the wagon, if you will. I hate to think of it as falling off the wagon, because again, this is your fitness program, your nutrition program should be about you, and it should be about helping you become the next best version of the very best version of yourself. And in doing that, there are going to be times when you're going to fail. There are going to be times when you're going to fall. There are going to be times when you're not going to perform at the highest levels, and that's okay. There's some great information. There's this infographic from Adam Grant that talks about when you're at your best, and it's not a straight line. It is just it's a jagged line that has full of ups and downs, and certainly we as humans have that. What is your best today? Your best today may not be your best. And we talk about that on the competition stage, and we'll get into that a little bit later in some other episodes about what is your best. But for an athlete who does not meet their expectations, whether they binged eat or we see sometimes when somebody has a pop in the scale and it turns out you look at their sodium and the sodium the day before was twice or three times what their normal sodium consumption is. And oftentimes that provides context to it. So if you're going to be talking to somebody from a mindset perspective, how do you, because I know we've been together long enough and I've experienced the time when you fell off your plan. How do you process that personally?
Well, there's a couple things I actually wanted to mention that I think are really important in this situation that you're describing. If you're having a hard time sticking to your plan and staying on point, one thing is, first of all, to be honest. So if you're working with a coach, let them know. If you're coaching yourself or working independently, be honest with yourself. I feel like journaling can be really good. Digging a little deeper into the why. Maybe your program's too strict. So maybe there's some modifications that can be made to the program. And a lot of coaches will come and ask me, what do I do? I have this client that's having a really hard time sticking to their plan. And a lot of times what I'll have the discussion with them about is, where are they having a difficult time? Is it in logging everything that they're eating? Is it in staying within their macros? Or, maybe they're challenged in figuring out how to make things fit. Where are we falling short? And then at that point, is it a matter of additional education, getting more comfortable with how to better use the logging app so they feel more comfortable logging everything? Maybe macros are a little bit too advanced and they need to start with a calorie goal first, or a calorie plus protein goals. Maybe simplifying the goals a little bit to make them a little bit easier to achieve, at least for the short run. And then you can start to add in more levels of complexity. For a more advanced person who's very comfortable with those kinds of things, it might just be that they need an intuitive meal, or what I like to use, I call flex calories, where they have an allotment they can use for whatever they want. And it's just enough freedom to where they don't feel so boxed in that they're going over and above. So finding ways to create enough flexibility, and this is such an individual thing. I have some people that are like, you can just feed me the same thing every day for a year on end and I just don't care. And for some of those people, they don't need that much more flexibility. But I have other people that if they don't have at least one free meal a week or some flexibility somewhere, they're going to go off plan. So it's better if I have some control over it versus no control over it. And I think this is where some people get into trouble is they're being so strict that it becomes very difficult. And if you're not a competitor, especially, and you're a lifestyle person, this has to fit your lifestyle. I mean, I had one athlete, and this is not a competitor, but I call them athletes because they're all in this fitness lifestyle, that came to me and said, my husband really wants me to be able to go to dinner with him once or twice a week. So it was really important for us to be able to build that in for her so that she could still have that enjoyment in her relationship and still achieve her fitness goals. And you can have both. And those are the kinds of things that really I want to be able to discuss here, because people need to know that it's not an all or none proposition. Even if you're competing, there's room for life. There's room for loved ones and for balance. That might ebb and flow a little bit, closer you get to a fitness goal. It just can't be that you negate all those other pieces of your life, because eventually you're going to hit a wall and not want to do it anymore.
We're using the scale kind of as our launch point, because that's our topic for today. But I get this vision, this movie set vision of the scale at the end of your bathroom, and then this long corridor becoming even longer and being darker as people are walking towards that scale, and just thinking, oh my God, I have to weigh myself, and the prospect or the appearance of shame or guilt in your mindset and everything. And then you're bombarded as an athlete, as a person, as an individual, between social media and the television, everything else that we hear and see with, oh my God, just go hard or go home, and just this whole beast mode thing, and the thought that, oh my God, you've got to do it. Scale is part of your daily regimen. It must be there. You must weigh yourself. You must get this done, that discipline. And I do think that as you're talking about this, part of it is the the allowance and the recognition that that may work for some people. And there are certainly some successful people who have been successful because they've done that. They've employed that methodology where they are just so disciplined every day. But if a plan doesn't work, then it doesn't work. And what is the definition of insanity, right? But which we like to, and I think most people know the definition of insanity, but we like to think about it a little bit differently in saying that if you don't like your results, change your approach. And that really gets into this notion that, hey, that may work for other people and it may seem sexy and seem, something that I want to do, but if you can't do it, it's not going to be successful. So how do you tell somebody what to look for in terms of how they manage that relationship? We talk about relationship with food, but I do think that part of that is also a relationship with your scale.
Absolutely. It's a relationship with your body at the end of the day. And too often we are not kind to ourselves when it comes to our own bodies. You and I work with some of the most beautiful humans on the earth, IFBB pros that are competing at the top level, and they're hard on themselves. They're honing in on whatever they feel like is their weakness. And so I do think it's human nature for us to be critical of ourselves. Sometimes, and the scale certainly ties into that greatly, because a lot of times people see a number on their scale that isn't what they were expecting or what they were wanting to see. And all of a sudden, the body image, which might have even been better before stepping on the scale, starts to decline. And that negative self-talk comes into play. I do think that's where having an objective eye can be really helpful too. And that's where coaching, I do think, is really helpful, to have somebody tell you, no, this is good. You're in a good place. And that reminder, we have to work on our own positive self-talk as well. But having somebody you can go to and talk to, whether that be a coach or a trusted friend or someone else, a trainer, that can help to reassure you, sometimes can really be helpful. Again, going back to looking at the scale only as a tool, it is not the be-all, end-all. It really depends on what your fitness goals are as to really what the be-all, end-all is. I mean, if you're a sprinter, then, your goal is to run as fast as possible. If you're, a bodybuilder, you want to have a certain shape and symmetry and size and, conditioning to the physique. And so all of those things are going to be variables. So this is literally one little piece of information that I feel like just sometimes gains too much importance in people's minds.
Well, and what you made me think about while you were just giving that description, and it's the nature of this industry, and I think it's not just this industry. I think it translates into other areas and other walks of life as well. But in our industry, in the bodybuilding industry, we talk about the judging of people, and we will always tell people that the judges are not looking for what's right with you. They are looking for what's wrong with you. And particular when you get to the pro stage, where the difference between athletes is just, it's a matter of taste. It's not something objective. It's not like you can say, oh, well, their measurements are different than the other person's measurements. And we well know the fact that nobody measures your weight when you walk onto stage. There are categories in bodybuilding where weight is a factor in the men's divisions, but in none of the women's divisions, and certainly not in
except bodybuilding.
But in none of the, not in bikini, and certainly not in figure or bikini, there's not they don't weigh you before you go on the stage, and they don't weigh you when you check in. So the scale really matters less there. And the analogy that I give is that if somebody were to win, be Miss Bikini Olympia, and weigh 192 pounds, nobody would say anything, and that might change people's perspective about what is proper weight. But because there's this focus and this emphasis on looking at what's wrong, does that then translate over into the frenemy relationship that athletes have with the scale of looking for what's wrong in a check-in, what they didn't do? I didn't hit my macros. I didn't hit my scale weight. I didn't do this. I didn't do that. How does that play into this mindset aspect?
One of the things that comes to mind, when we're talking about the scale and the weight and specifically talking about competitors and, the bikini world. What's interesting is a lot of times I feel like people think the lower the better, the leaner the better. And even in the competition world, when we're talking about the bikini division and other divisions as well, but that's kind of the primary that we're coaching right now, is that it's the look at the end of the day. It's not what that number is on the scale or how lean the person is. And we had an athlete recently who came to us and had been competing prior to us at 109, 110 pounds and was too lean, was too small, was underweight. We were able to, in a really short period of time, get that athlete's weight up. And then this athlete performed on stage at about 120 pounds and turned pro, and hadn't been able to prior, not understanding that, less wasn't more. So this, I think, ties really well into the conversation about that data point. For us, when we took on this athlete, we weren't really caring so much about what that person weighed. We were looking at her and saying, wow, she's too lean, she's underweight, we need to feed her, we need to see, where is that sweet spot for her. And so, especially when it comes to the bodybuilding world, where it's about shape, it's about muscle. It's not just about how, small, which would be weight. That's not the main factor. So this is whether you're a bodybuilder and your goal is to have this shape and beautiful muscle and all of this, or if your goal is a different type of fitness. For the most part, weight is not the main, should never be the main factor. I mean, I can't think of any sport unless, it's a sport where you have to specifically weigh in to get into your, we talked about boxing or powerlifting where you have to make weight to get into your category. But usually those guys afterwards are going to go eat a bunch and fill back up. It's just a moment in time. But I think that's like getting back to that, weight just being that one factor of tracking. For us, a lot of times it can be to be able to refer back to, we have a competitor that is going to get on stage. We get feedback. We know we need to put on some muscle. Then we're gauging, we take an improvement season. We work on building that muscle. And then from there, we're tracking weight again to see how much muscle did we gain during that time? How low did the weight need to get? How lean did we need to get when we got back on stage after taking that improvement season? So it's, again, going back to that being really useful information. So it's important to have the information. It's just the mindset around it that really needs work for most athletes, at least in our world.
Yeah, you just brought me back to thinking about time in the military, and whenever we would administer a physical fitness test, we also had height weight around that. So based on your age, your height, and your weight, you would have to weigh in and meet a certain weight standard in order to stay on duty. Otherwise, you would be flagged and you couldn't be promoted, and other negative aspects, negative personnel aspects. But the one part that was always interesting about the height weight standards was that I never made weight, not once. And I would always have to take the tape option. So they would tape my neck and my abdomen to see. But because I was bodybuilding, my weight was always over what the Army classified as the appropriate weight for my height. So the context of that was always, I never failed to make the tape. But it's funny that there were some people that did some interesting things. So because they measure your neck, and the thicker your neck, the more allowance you get on the weight, because there was a formula. And there were guys literally I knew that would do neck exercises to make their neck bigger so that they could make the standard. And it's like, hey, why don't you just focus on your physical fitness instead of just making your neck bigger? But this ties into that same mindset of, what's the quickest way that I can get to this solution or the outcome without thinking about the bigger picture. So I do think it's interesting in our world that people are so focused on that scale weight instead of the broader picture of what am I putting into this check-in? What am I putting into this week? And, it's so funny. You also have always told me that, look, it takes 3,500 calories surplus, meaning over what your body is burning if you were to do nothing, your basal metabolic rate. takes 3,500 calories over that to add a pound of fat. So before you go off and start thinking that, oh my God, the scale is showing this, let's stop the bus, put down those frying pans, as it were, and process this check-in for what I did this week.
I love that you brought two great things that you brought up. One, talking about in the military, they were using body mass index. So for people to understand a little bit where that's coming from. And it's a table that has height and weight, and then you go down to a number, and that's the body mass index. And so for a lot of bodybuilders, it shows them as obese because muscle weighs more than fat and they have a lot more muscle. So it doesn't take that into account. So when Greg is talking about the tape, that's where they're actually measuring circumference in order to then go, okay, well, if your waist is that small, then obviously this is muscle, you're not obese. So that's where bringing in more data. And like you talked about earlier, we like circumference measurements. That's one of the things that we add to ours. So I really loved that a lot. And then talking about how many calories does it take to burn a pound of fat or to gain a pound of fat? And so when you're doing the daily weighing, and when I talked about it being like a science experiment, I think it's a fun thing to do with no judgment, and think about, if I'm up 2 pounds today from where I was yesterday, did I eat an extra 7,000 calories on top of what I burned? I think not. I think that would be pretty impressive. If I mean, maybe I did an eating contest. That could be possible. S'mores eating contest. I like those. So really, at that point, then I get to be a detective. Okay, I'm up 2 pounds from yesterday. I know I didn't eat an extra 7,000 calories. I know this is not body fat. Okay, what's different? Did I not sleep as much? Did I eat more salt last night? Did I eat later than I normally do in the night? There's just a number of things. How stressed? And I mean, you and I have talked about this recently. We had one athlete in particular who was just really stressed out, stressing about the show timing, stressing out the scale. And there's been multiple times where I've had this happen, where I know this person is literally shooting their cortisol, their adrenaline, all these hormones that are associated with stress, and it's affecting their weight, that's then affecting their stress, that's then affecting their weight. And it's like a vicious cycle. And, I've actually pulled people out of shows and told them, okay, I think we need more time. Let's just not do that show, just so they would stop stressing. And the minute I did that, their weight dropped. So it's really interesting, when you start to really break it down from the scientific standpoint, that there's no way you're putting on fat this quickly. So what is it? What is actually happening that's keeping you from seeing the progress that you're expecting to see?
So as we wrap this up then, okay, and we give people some relationship advice with their, because I guess this is, right, relationship advice with your frenemy, relationship advice with your scale. How do you establish a good relationship with your scale? And I think the first point that we hit on was really the why. Why are you weighing yourself? To understand, and both with that why, and I think context is the second part of this, but somewhere between why and context, there's the where am I at? What are my objectives for this particular weigh-in? So we have the why are you weighing yourself? We have the where are you at in your fitness objectives for that week, that month, that year, whatever that is. The context. As we talk about context, we talked about stress, we talked about sleep, we talked about salt, sodium consumption, and that being over the top. Your cycle for women, if you're on your cycle, that usually will result in a weight bump. If you're taking supplementation that may affect your weight for that particular check-in, you may have introduced a supplement the previous week that is then showing up on the scale in the current week. We didn't talk about poo, but we do have at least one athlete who weighs themselves before and after a bowel movement, which is interesting. And it's an interesting sign. I mean, it's very interesting to me just to see that difference and to then get in your mind that the whole aspect that, okay, everything, there's so many things that affect what shows up on that number. Did I miss anything, do you think, in terms of your relationship with the scale? So what, why, what, where, and no, why, where, why, where am I at on my fitness journey, and what's the context of this? I think those were the 3 points.
Yeah, I think you hit on it. And at the end of the day, most of the things that we're talking about point back to water. So at the end of the day, and I think that's the thing that I would just keep in mind too, as you're going through this process of asking yourself these questions. The big fluctuation is usually water. So if you're less hydrated, then you're going to weigh less. If you're more hydrated, you're going to weigh more. And this can be 3 to 5 pound differences.
That's
I mean, it can be a big difference. And for women, obviously, the menstrual cycle, that was the one thing that, I know we brought that up at one point, but there's different times during the month where we hold more water than other times. So it's always going back to that, but understanding those things that you mentioned, absolutely. Why am I weighing myself? What are my objectives? What am I looking to see or get confirmation of this week? And, then asking yourself, how does the result from that weigh-in factor in with all these other factors? Does it make sense? And then depending on your mindset around it and how well you're able to self-coach, deciding, is every day going to be okay, or do I need to just do it once a week or even once a month, and really understanding yourself and your psyche and what's going to best serve your ultimate goals.
That's a great place for us to end this episode. And just, you'll hear a recurring theme in these podcasts, which is the more information we get, the more answers we have, the more questions we have. So those questions about the what, the why, the where, and the context of your weigh-in, those are the questions to be asking yourself to make sure that you're putting the right mindset around the scale as your frenemy.
Absolutely. Thank you for tuning in to FitBody Lifestyle. We hope today's episode has left you feeling motivated and equipped to tackle your fitness goals, business challenges, and the daily dance of life. Remember to value progress over perfection. Life's tough enough alone. Find the chosen family around you to help you along the way.
If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd really appreciate it if you would subscribe and leave us a review on your favorite streaming platform. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at FitBody Fusion.